Hey guys, tonight we dive straight into the smoky breath of war elephants, the crunch of Roman boots, and one of the wildest revenge quests ever plotted before breakfast. You're about to become Hannibal Barca, Carthage's greatest war chief, strategist, survivor, and all-around chaos architect. You've got a sword in one hand and an oath carved into your memory. Oh, and your travel plans? They include marching elephants over the freaking Alps. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your city and local time in the comments too. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're 9 years old. The Mediterranean sun glints off your bronze breastplate. Not that you wear it yet, but your father is grooming you for it. His name is Hannibal Barcas, and he's not so much a dad as a force of nature. You watch him kneel beside the temple altar, eyes sharp as obsidian. He calls you forward. You're not allowed to blink. This is the moment. He makes you swear an oath before the gods, before your ancestors, and most terrifyingly, before him. You promise to hate Rome, to hate them forever. Not in a moody teenager kind of way, in a build an army and destroy their empire kind of way. You don't really understand politics yet, but you do understand that Rome humiliated Carthage in the First Punic War, stripped your people of naval dominance, and charged them hefty war reparations. That's the boring version. What you see is your father's rage, quiet, volcanic, and about to be your inheritance. Fast forward a few years and your training is brutal. You're up before sunrise, riding bareback horses and wrestling grown men in the dirt. Your education, tactics, languages, siegecraft, poison, and yes, elephant psychology. Carthaginians believed if you could handle a 2-ton walking tank with tusks, you could handle anything. At 26, after your brother-in-law is assassinated in Spain, you take command of the Carthaginian forces in Iberia. The army doesn't flinch, they already call you the Thunderbolt. You lead by example. You sleep rough, eat sparingly, and bleed when they bleed. Morale is high. Your soldiers adore you, or fear you. It's hard to tell the difference, but both work. Now, here's the thing. Rome had this little clause in a treaty saying Carthage wouldn't mess with Saguntum, a city under Roman protection. You, of course, take one look at that clause and then take Saguntum. You just burn it down. That'll do it. Rome gets the message and declares war. But they're not ready for what comes next. You don't take the sea route. That's predictable. Blockable. No, you're going to do the impossible. You'll take your army, tens of thousands of infantry, cavalry, and a squad of battle elephants, over the Alps. The Alps, in winter, with no Google Maps, not even a snugly down coat. Historians still argue whether this was genius or straight-up lunacy. But from your point of view, it's just math. Rome expects you from the south, you'll come from the north. Surprise! Here's a quirky tidbit. One of your elephants is reportedly named Surus, and he's possibly the last survivor of the trek through the Alps. You supposedly ride him into battle. How's that for intimidating? Big Guy had a broken tusk and a bad attitude. Back in Iberia, you train your men relentlessly. They're multi-ethnic. Iberians, Numidians, Libyans, Celts, each with different fighting styles, superstitions and temperaments. Your job is to make them a single war machine, and you do, largely through charisma, iron discipline, and the occasional very public execution. You understand terrain like a painter understands canvas. You map routes in your sleep. Rivers aren't obstacles, they're strategic options. You use scouts like modern generals use drones to feed you constant updates down to the hoof print. But above all, your biggest asset is psychological warfare. You start rumours. You bribe cities before sieging them. You reward deserters from the enemy camp. Rome sees you not just as a general, but as a shadow creeping closer every day. And still, they underestimate you. They send legions to intercept you in Gaul, thinking they've cornered you. Instead, you bribe the local tribes, convince them Rome is the real enemy, and suddenly you're not fighting your way through. You're being escorted. Every step of the way, your reputation grows. Rome starts to whisper your name at night. Mothers threaten misbehaving kids with, "Hannibal will come for you." Even Roman senators debate in panic while you march through their backyard. But let's pause on one historical fact. Carthage, at this point, doesn't fully back you. They support you, sure, but not with everything. Politics back home are complicated. Half the council sees you as a loose cannon. You're not just at war with Rome. You're waging a one-man campaign for Carthaginian relevance. So, you keep marching, northward, toward the white teeth of the Alps. As you camp near the Rhone River, you stare at those distant snow-drenched peaks and you smile. Not because this is safe or sane, but because you know that beyond those mountains lies the Italian heartland, Rome's heart, and you're going to punch straight through its chest, and maybe ride an elephant while doing it. You stand at the edge of the Rhone, and the air already feels colder, like the mountains ahead are breathing frost down your neck. You've made it this far with tens of thousands of men, cavalry, pack animals, and yes, your famously irritable elephants. Most generals would stop here, maybe build a fort, send home a flattering report, and try to negotiate a safer route. But not you. You point to the Alps and say, "That way." Your soldiers don't cheer. They look up at the jagged, icy nightmare in front of them, and probably consider deserting on the spot. These are not hills. They're gods with white beards and moods that change faster than a Roman senator's alliances. You tell them what they need to hear, that on the other side lies glory, wealth, revenge, and an Italy ready to be plundered like a ripe vineyard. You don't mention the parts you're not sure of, like whether the passes are open, or how many days of snow you'll face, or the likelihood that at least a third of the men will die before you even see a Roman road. But hey, who wants all the spoilers? The march begins, and it is instantly a disaster. The trails are narrow, barely goat-worthy in places. Your animals stumble. Soldiers freeze overnight. Icicles dangle from beards, and frostbite blooms like bruises. You trudge forward on slippery rock while avalanches growl above, like the mountain itself is annoyed you're even trying this. One mainstream historical fact. The journey takes over 2 weeks, longer than anyone expected, and the army loses nearly half its numbers by the time they descend. Some sources say you started with nearly 50,000 men and only brought around 26,000 down the other side. Elephants, just a handful survive, and they are not in a good mood. But the quirky detail, there's a possibility you used vinegar to help carve paths through the rock. Sounds ridiculous, but some ancient sources say your men heated the stone with fire, then poured wine or vinegar on it to crack it. Was this real? Who knows? But it's the kind of desperate genius move that fits your style perfectly. And through all this, the Romans still don't believe you'll actually make it. Historians still argue whether the Romans were truly blindsided or just criminally underprepared. It's like watching someone paddle a flaming canoe across shark-infested waters and saying, "Yeah, but he won't reach shore." But you do. You reach it. You descend the final ridge and stare into the Po Valley. Italy. Roman territory. The silence is staggering. Your men exhausted, your supplies almost gone, and your elephants down to a lonely few. But you did it. No one else had ever brought a full army over the Alps before. Certainly not in winter. Certainly not with war elephants. And Rome? They're not panicking yet. They're still scrambling to figure out where you even are. They thought you'd still be in Spain. They never expected this. One consul is off marching his army towards Spain, and the other is racing north in total confusion. You don't give them time to regroup. Your first real battle in Italy is at the Ticinus River, where your cavalry obliterates the Romans. It's fast, brutal, and sets the tone. But it's also personal. Your younger brother Mago reportedly saves your life when you're thrown from your horse in the middle of the melee. This is not chess. It's bare-knuckled war. Then comes the Trebia. You lure the Roman forces into a river crossing on a freezing morning. Smart, since their troops haven't eaten, haven't warmed up, and are soaked to the bone. Yours? Rested. Federal. Hidden. You flank them with a detachment of troops hidden in tall grass, led by your brother Mago, because of course. You turn the field into a Roman graveyard. Word spreads like wildfire. "The Carthaginian is here," they whisper in the Roman streets. "He crossed the Alps." You become a myth in real time. But here's where it gets wild. Some Alpine tribes you pass through are still telling oral stories about your crossing centuries later. Bits and pieces survive in local folklore. Tales of elephants climbing cliffs, strange bronze-skinned men speaking in alien tongues, and entire rivers turning red with the blood of soldiers. You left a mark not just on military history, but on mountain legend. And yet, your army is bleeding out in other ways. You lost men in the mountains. You lost more in the battles. Your supply lines are non-existent. Your elephants are dropping one by one, and winter's far from over. So you adjust. Again. You start relying more heavily on your cavalry, especially the Numidians, wild riders from North Africa, who can literally turn a charge on a dime. They become your scalpel slicing through Roman lines while your infantry holds steady. You adapt your formations for speed and flexibility. You stop trying to crush Rome head-on. Instead, you start peeling them apart, one bad decision at a time. And Rome, they begin to fear not just your army, but your thinking. You're not just winning, you're predicting. You seem to know where they'll go before they go. One general is said to have told his troops, "It's not just a battle, it's a trap, and we're already in it, and you're just getting warmed up." By now, Rome has figured out that you're not just some desert pirate who got lucky. You're an existential threat with a battlefield IQ that makes their generals look like sleep-deprived interns. So they throw everything they have at you: legions, consuls, pride. You greet them all with a grin, and what's about to become your most legendary maneuver, the double envelopment at Cannae. You've been dancing around the Romans for nearly 2 years now, bleeding them at the Ticinus, wrecking them at the Trebia, and humiliating them at Lake Trasimene, a battle where you used fog, terrain, and a perfect ambush to crush an entire Roman army without even being seen until it was too late. Remember that fog? You made it your co-commander. After that embarrassment, Rome gets serious. They muster the largest army in their history, about 80,000 men. That's double your force, maybe more. They want overwhelming force, classic bully energy. So you say, "Fine, let's do this." The place is Cannae, a flat, open plain in southeastern Italy. Perfect for cavalry maneuvers, perfect for you. The Romans line up in their usual dense formation, thinking mass will win the day. Spoiler, mass is exactly what you're counting on. You arrange your army like a crescent, your weakest troops in the middle, your strongest on the flanks. It looks like a dumb idea. It looks like you're inviting the Romans to smash through the centre. So they do, and that's the bait. As the Roman wedge pushes deeper into your centre, your troops retreat in a controlled, deliberate collapse. They keep falling back, shaping the Roman advance into a tightening funnel. Meanwhile, your African infantry on the wings starts to pivot inward. Your cavalry, Numidians on one side, Iberians on the other, has already defeated the Roman cavalry and swung around behind. Now comes the trap. You close the jaws. Infantry from the flanks seals the sides. Cavalry slams into the rear. The Romans are surrounded in every direction. No retreat, no visibility, no airflow. It's not just a military victory. It's a slow, suffocating death box. The press of bodies is so dense that soldiers can't raise their arms. Some die without even seeing the enemy. Others are trampled by their own. Historians still argue whether you intended the double envelopment from the start or adapted on the fly. Either way, it's recognized as one of the most perfect tactical executions in the history of warfare. It's studied in every military academy that isn't completely allergic to humility. Want a quirky detail? Supposedly, after the battle, the gold rings of the dead Roman nobles were gathered and poured into a single massive sack, enough to send back to Carthage as a message. Here's your war. Hope it fits in the treasury. You kill or capture over 50,000 Romans in a single day. That's hard to picture. Think of a packed football stadium, and then imagine it flattened in silence. And yet, Rome doesn't surrender. You stand on that bloody field, surrounded by a victory so complete, it should have ended the war, and still the enemy lives. Back in Rome, they don't negotiate. They recruit more soldiers. They lower the enlistment age. They arm criminals and slaves. They ban public mourning so no one sees the grief. They double down on the madness. You're probably thinking, wait, what? Why not march straight to Rome? Good question. Many of your officers beg you to, especially Hannibal, your cavalry commander, who supposedly says, "You know how to win, Hannibal, but not how to use your victory." Brutal, but there's strategy behind your pause. You don't have siege equipment. Rome's walls are formidable. Your supply lines are shaky. Carthage hasn't sent reinforcements, and Italy isn't quite yours yet. So instead of throwing yourself against Rome's walls, you go for something slower, but smarter. You try to break Rome from the inside out. You start flipping their allies. See, Rome's empire isn't just one city, it's a patchwork of tribes, regions, and former enemies turned friends. You approach them one by one. You promise freedom. You offer protection. You warn that Rome's losing, and you just proved it at Cannae. And it works. Cities start switching sides. Capua, the second largest city in Italy, defects. That's not a win. That's a coup. Still, the cost of Cannae lingers. Your army is tired. Supplies are low. You've lost key officers. And now, every move you make is shadowed by a new Roman policy. Avoid open battle with Hannibal at all costs. Rome switches tactics. Enter Fabius Maximus, nicknamed the Delayer. He follows you everywhere, harassing your foragers, denying you open battle, and never taking the bait. He's like a mosquito with a PhD in logistics. You respect him, quietly hate him, but you adapt again. You start burning crops in your own path, but leaving the fields of Fabius untouched. So his people grow suspicious of his motives. You use Roman letters and seals captured after battles to send fake messages and orders. You manipulate politics with whispers and forged scrolls. Your war isn't just swords now, it's theatre, mind games. You become a ghost in the Italian countryside, everywhere, nowhere, always one step ahead. And yet, despite the brilliance, despite the mountain crossing, the epic victories, and the psychological warfare, you haven't won. Not really. Rome refuses to fall. That's the problem with being too brilliant. When your enemy survives, they evolve. The sword is only half of war. The rest, illusions, whispers, and the art of making your enemy terrified to sleep. You, Hannibal, become less a man and more a shadow, lurking just outside Roman reach, shaping your campaign like a chess master who never lifts a piece. You've slaughtered their armies, broken their pride at Cannae, but now it's time to dig into their minds. You don't need to storm Rome, you just need to make them believe you might, at any moment. You drift through Italy like smoke, leaving destruction and paranoia in your wake. And Rome? It starts building walls inside its own city out of fear, not around it, inside it, just in case. One senator supposedly begins every speech with, "Hannibal is at the gates," even when you're nowhere near the gates. That phrase survives for centuries, Hannibal ad portas, because you've scared Rome into a permanent twitch. You move from city to city, feeding on their fear. One day you burn a field, the next you spare a village. You're not just fighting a war, you're crafting a legend. You make people talk. You want Rome guessing. Are you about to march on them again? Are you regrouping? Are you dead? The right rumour at the right time is deadlier than any blade. Here's one of your classics. You fake troop movements to suggest you've gone north, while quietly encircling a Roman supply convoy instead. You don't just win, you undo your enemies before they've even drawn a sword. And the espionage? Next level. You've got a network of informants that rivals anything modern intelligence agencies dream of. Locals paid in coined food, captured Romans bribed with freedom. You even turn Roman slaves into double agents. Every city you pass through gets tagged with quiet allies, waiting for the signal to rise. Historians still argue whether you were the first to institutionalize battlefield deception like this, but no one doubts your mastery of it. The Romans, infamously straight arrow in their tactics, just don't know what to do with you. Their generals follow the rulebook. You write new chapters mid-battle, take your use of terrain. You don't just march through forests, you set traps in them. You bribe guides to mislead pursuing Roman columns into swamps and dead ends. One Roman general chases you for days through the Apennines, only to find you've doubled back and raided a town he thought was safe. That town, supposedly full of grain meant to feed his army. Oh, and then there's the fire tactic. You're trying to escape a Roman force that has trapped you in a narrow valley. Most generals panic or surrender. You look up at the nearby ridges and see a chance. That night, you tie bundles of sticks to the horns of cattle, light them on fire, and send the terrified animals charging up the slopes. The Romans think it's your army retreating in the dark and rush after them, only to be ambushed when you slip out the other end. Quirky detail? Some say your men even shouted orders to the cattle to complete the illusion. Because when you lie big. Even your presence at a distance becomes a weapon. You begin using proxy tactics, stirring rebellions in Roman-allied cities, turning local feuds into full-scale riots. You pay off enemy commanders to accidentally lose key battles. You flip an entire Greek garrison by sending them a gift basket with essentially an offer they couldn't refuse. Spoiler, it did not contain cookies. Rome starts seeing ghosts. They send legions after shadows. One general camps outside a city you were spotted near, except you'd left days ago. His scouts had been bribed, his map outdated, you made sure of it. And still, despite all this chaos, you don't take Rome. Why? Not because you can't, but because Carthage won't send enough reinforcements. Back home, your council drags its feet. You're a hero, sure, but also a wild card. They think you've gone rogue, that you'll win the war and then crown yourself king. Which is not wrong exactly. But come on, a little faith would be nice. So now you're stuck in Italy, dragging out a war with dwindling resources, relying more and more on your wits, your cavalry, and the fear Rome refuses to shake. You become a myth. Mothers hush their children with your name, senators don't sleep, generals keep eyes to the north, south, east, and especially the shadows. But here's the open question. Could you have taken Rome if Carthage had supported you fully? Historians still argue. Some say yes. Strike right after Cannae and the city might have buckled. Others say Rome was too stubborn, too fortified, too Roman. One thing's for sure. You're winning battles, but not the war. You've made Italy a nightmare for Rome, but the clock is ticking. Your army is exhausted. The locals, once hopeful, now grow restless. The myth of Hannibal, mighty as it is, can't feed an army forever. You start to feel it, little cracks. A city that once welcomed you now hesitates. A general you trusted gets skittish. Rome, meanwhile, adapts, learns. They start appointing younger, sharper commanders. They stop chasing you and start targeting your supply lines. And somewhere, far away, a new name rises. A Roman general studying your every move. One day he'll become your mirror image. For now, though, you're still the ghost in Rome's closet, the one they whisper about, the one they can't catch. Time is no longer your ally. You feel it in your bones, in the way your army wakes slower each morning, in the hesitance behind the eyes of once bold allies. Italy is a chessboard you've dominated for years, but now the pieces are shifting. You still hold the upper hand in tactics, but your reach is shortening. The enemy grows more patient, more cunning, and perhaps worst of all, your supposed supporters, those polished politicians back in Carthage, are treating your war like background noise. Your strategy shifts again. If you can't batter Rome into submission, you'll peel away its foundations, one ally at a time. Capua was your first big political catch, but not your last. You turn your attention to cities like Tarentum and Arpi, enticing them with freedom, coin, and the promise of Roman defeat. And they come, slowly at first, then in waves. Local leaders switch sides. Garrisons revolt. Roman governors vanish in the night. Of course, some of your new allies expect instant results. They think Hannibal will protect them like a god, rain down elephants like thunder. But the truth is messier. You're running lean. Your army eats what it finds. Your men are veterans, brilliant, disciplined, loyal, but fewer in number every month. You can't be everywhere at once. Rome smells blood, not yours, but that of your friendships. So they send out commanders with silver tongues and long memories. These Roman envoys work like termites. They remind cities what happens to traitors. They promise clemency for those who rejoin the fold. And slowly, some begin to doubt you. Some even switch back, sneaking messages to Rome while smiling at your officers. And here's the betrayal that cuts the deepest. Fabius Maximus retakes Tarentum, not by force, but by bribing a single Brutian guard. One man opens the gate while you're elsewhere, trusting the city to hold. It doesn't. You lose a major port, and with it a message is sent across the peninsula. Maybe Hannibal can be beaten. Now you're waging a war of whispers. Food becomes a weapon. You can't grow it, can't safely store it. Rome blocks your supply routes and poisons wells. You have to trade with cities that don't even like you, cutting deals that would make your father spit. You start paying soldiers in loot, in spoils, in promises of someday. But someday gets heavier each time you say it. And then there's the pasta politics. Literally. You're operating in southern Italy, home of olives, wine, and extremely opinionated local leaders. Every town has its own rivalries, feuds, secret grudges that go back generations. You're not just managing a military campaign anymore. You're mediating arguments over grain taxes and wedding alliances. One time, you're called in to settle a land dispute between two allied tribes. You arrive in full armour and leave with a headache. Quirky detail? Some accounts suggest you occasionally sat down at local banquets and debated philosophy with regional nobles, in between battles. Because why not spice up war with a side of Plato? But beneath it all, you're still the predator Rome can't ignore. You know their patterns. You bait them constantly. You win skirmishes with half the men and double the nerve. You even offer peace terms at one point, terms that would have ended the war and secured your dominance in Italy. Rome refuses. Of course, they don't want peace. They want you gone. And they're getting creative. Rome begins retraining its cavalry, improving its supply chains, learning from you. One general, Claudius Nero, starts implementing harassment tactics that look suspiciously familiar. He stops charging in. He starts thinking like you. Then there's the most chilling sign. Rome begins recruiting your allies. Not their cities, your soldiers. You start losing Numidians, those brilliant light cavalrymen who've been the razor edge of your army for years. One of their kings, Massinissa, flips sides. He likes the smell of a Roman future. And just like that, you lose one of your fastest, smartest weapons. Rome gains it. It stings. Historians still argue whether you could have shored up these alliances better, maybe sent hostages to secure loyalty, maybe tightened your network of spies. But with no reinforcements, no funding from Carthage, and no real control over the Italian political soup pot you've stirred, it's hard to blame you. You adapt. You always adapt. You move your base to the hill town of Croton. Defensive, isolated, practical. It's not glamorous, but it lets you regroup. You drill your men harder. You switch to guerrilla-style raids, targeting Roman grain stores and ambushing convoys. You live in the dirt now, a war chief clinging to ground not out of pride, but out of purpose. And all the while, the Roman Senate, those old men in togas, slowly begin planning something bigger. They're watching your every move, charting your habits, not to catch you, but to outgrow you. A new Roman commander is training across the sea in Spain. His name is Scipio. Young, ambitious, obsessed with you. He's studying your tactics like sacred scripture, and he's learning fast. You don't know it yet, but your final battle is taking shape. Not here, not in the muddy Italian hills where you've bled for years, but back in Africa, your homeland. For now, though, you're still standing, still brilliant, still feared, but the cracks are spider-webbing. And you know something Rome hasn't figured out yet. When a predator's wounded, he gets smarter, deadlier, and much, much quieter. Your boots are heavier now, not just from the mud of southern Italy, but from the years. 15 of them. That's how long you've held the line, dragging out a war in a land that's never quite yours, with an army that's slowly fading into memory. You're still Hannibal Barca, the thunderbolt, the spectre Rome can't shake, but the thunder's getting quieter. Your plans are still sharp, your instincts flawless, But Rome has changed. They've adapted to your rhythm. They've started playing your game, and worse, they've gotten good at it. You hold on to Croton like a fortress, but it's not the seat of a conqueror anymore. It's the outpost of a man keeping the wolves at bay. Your soldiers, grizzled, scarred, loyal as ever, but they're not the fresh, hopeful warriors you led over the Alps. They've buried too many brothers. They've had too many winters without a real home. And you start to feel it in your gut, that quiet dread, that creeping awareness that the tide is turning and not in your favour. Rome is winning the long game. They don't just bleed you on the battlefield anymore. They cut off your routes. They retake city after city. They lean on the diplomacy you once dominated. Cities that once threw open their gates for you now watch you pass with wary eyes, calculating who's going to be in charge tomorrow. And then it gets worse. Carthage sends word. They need you back. Why? Because Scipio, the golden boy general you haven't met yet, has taken the fight to Africa. Yes, that's Scipio, the one who's been watching you from afar, learning your moves like a fanboy with a grudge. He's landed in your backyard, and he's not playing defense. He's torching cities, rallying Numidian kings and threatening Carthage itself. And suddenly, you are no longer the invader. You're the defender. The war has flipped. The retreat from Italy is quiet, bitter and necessary. You leave behind the bones of your campaign, abandoned allies, loyal but exhausted soldiers, and the roads that once led toward Rome, now heading nowhere. Some historians say you could have kept going. Others say you should have surrendered earlier. But the truth? You left because there was nothing left to win in Italy. The stage had moved. The war was calling you home, so you return to Africa. You expect a hero's welcome. What you get is a mix of panic, relief, and political infighting. Carthage doesn't say thank you. They say, fix it. And you do what you've always done. You rebuild, fast. You find new troops, mostly green recruits, some mercenaries, a few veterans dragged back from the brink. You train them like mad. You scrounge up elephants, less than you'd like, and certainly less than the old days, but enough to make a statement. You reach out to Syphax, the other Numidian king, and try to wedge him against Massinissa, who's now fully on Team Rome, and you prepare for one final match. This isn't a battle for terrain. This is a battle of minds. You and Scipio are two of history's sharpest tacticians, and now you're on the same field, for the first time. But before it comes to swords, you try one last thing. Diplomacy. You meet Scipio face to face. Two legends across the table. He's younger, confident, polite. He speaks with the calm of a man who knows he's on the winning side. You propose terms, peace, balance. Everyone walks away with dignity. He listens, but he doesn't take the bait. He wants closure. Rome wants a clean ending. And so, you ready yourself for Zama. Now, here's a quirky tidbit. Before the battle, you reportedly arrange your elephants at the front, counting on their charge to break Scipio's lines. But Scipio, he knows. He's studied you. He trains his soldiers to part like curtains, letting the elephants pass harmlessly through and then pinning them from the sides. Some elephants even panic and charge backward into your own ranks. It's not just humiliating, it's devastating. The cavalry hits next. Massinissa, your former ally, flanks you hard. Your infantry holds longer than expected, even starts to gain ground. But the flanks collapse. You're surrounded. It's Cannae. But this time, you're in the middle. And as the dust settles, as the screams fade and your lines fall silent, you know. This is it. Zama isn't just a battle. It's the closing of a chapter. You retreat, battered but alive. Somehow, always alive. Carthage sues for peace. The terms are brutal. The empire you tried to save now limps under Roman chains. Historians still argue how close the battle really was. Some say you nearly won. Others say it was hopeless from the start. But in the end, the scoreboard doesn't lie. You were outmaneuvered, and not because you weren't brilliant, but because Rome finally grew a Hannibal of its own. Scipio earns a new name, Africanus. You earn exile, but not irrelevance. Back in Carthage, You try to fix the rot from within. You become a political reformer, a corruption hunter. You make enemies, fast. The same senators who once doubted you now fear your influence more than ever. Rome hears whispers that you're gaining too much power. They demand your head, and so you leave. Not in chains, just in shadow. You wander from kingdom to kingdom, advising other rulers, outsmarting Roman agents, watching the empire you once brought to its knees now stretch across the Mediterranean like a greedy octopus. But you never stop thinking, plotting, waiting, because even in exile you remain what Rome always feared most, unpredictable. You're no longer on the battlefield, but you've never stopped fighting. Across the sea, Rome celebrates its victory. Scipio becomes a hero, the Senate breathes easier, and children play in the streets without the fear of hoofbeats in the distance. But you, Hannibal, are alive. That alone feels like an insult to Rome's pride. They didn't kill you, and that makes them nervous. So you drift through exile like smoke through cracks. First you settle in Tyre, then in Ephesus, then in the court of Antiochus III, the king of the Seleucid Empire, one of Rome's last real threats in the east. Antiochus sees your potential immediately. After all, you're Hannibal Barca. Even your enemies call you the greatest general of your age. He makes you a naval commander, gives you counsel, and leans on your insight as he prepares to challenge Rome himself. Only problem? Antiochus isn't you. His campaign falls flat, his armies crumble, and Rome wins again. Of course, once more, you're the man they blame. Rome now treats you like a living virus, wandering, adaptable, potentially catastrophic. They send envoys with sweet smiles and not-so-subtle suggestions. Exile him farther, strip him of titles, keep him out of reach. So you run. Again. You land in Bithynia next, still offering your brain like a sharpened blade to whoever will listen. You advise kings, critique their military strategies, and never stop watching Rome grow larger. You're aging now. The elephant skin toughness of your youth is giving way to creased skin and a heavy stare. But the mind? Still sharp. And Rome? Still watching. They demand your extradition yet again, sending letters, bribes, and ultimatums. It becomes clear that no matter how far you run, they will never stop hunting you. You're not a man to them. You're unfinished business. A bad dream they need to kill to sleep peacefully again. So, you take control. One quiet day, as Roman agents circle in, you slip away. You drink a vial of poison you've carried with you for years, tucked in a ring according to some stories. Others say it was sewn into your robes. Either way, it's swift, dignified, controlled. Because if there's one thing you've always hated, it's leaving your fate in someone else's hands. You die alone, but not unknown. And as the news spreads, there's a silence that follows. Even in Rome, where some senators raise glasses, others feel the shiver of history. Because they know what you were. Not just a warrior, not just a general, a storm. Historians still argue what your legacy truly is. Some call you the greatest tactician of all time. Others say your failure to take Rome was proof of your limits. Some see you as a tragic figure, undone by weak political support. Others as a terrifying genius who nearly cracked the uncrackable. What's not debated, you changed warfare forever. Double envelopment at Cannae. Still taught. Psychological warfare. You turned it into an art. Logistics, terrain, misdirection. You didn't just use these tools, you owned them, and quirky detail to close on. There's a legend that Napoleon, centuries later, kept a bust of you in his study, just to remind himself what real brilliance looked like. Now, slow your breathing, because the fighting's done. The clash of steel, the crunch of snow under war elephant feet, the shouting in Latin and Punic, it's all grown quiet now. You've laid down your sword, and so have the men who chased you for decades. The maps are folded, the cities are still. Even Rome, the eternal, finally sleeps. You close your eyes on a life spent running forward, uphill, against history's current. Not always winning, but never backing down. Every step you took, every gambit you risked, left footprints others would study for centuries. So rest, General. The elephants are sleeping now. The fire's gone out. The enemy is no longer at the gates. And in the quiet, your story doesn't fade.